You're listening to Spurscast, episode 628. My name is Paul Garcia, and I'm your host here on the Spurscast. Today I'll be joined by Project Spurs writer Collin Reid. In this episode, Collin and I will discuss Chandler Hutchison being waived by the Spurs, Keita Bates-Diop re-signing with the team, and other roster moves the team still needs to make. Let's go to get this episode started. Collin, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well myself. You know, we're here in the doldrums of the off season, but you know, it's training camp is on its way. It's already September, and just I think it's September 28th. All the training camp starts, so it's getting here pretty soon here in the next few weeks for the Spurs. All right, Collin, let's go and kick off this episode going through our first topic, and that is the Spurs waiving Chandler Hutchison. This is very much, I would say, almost like an expected move. This wasn't too surprising. We've discussed this kind of move probably coming several times on the Spurscast. Hutchison was waived though on Saturday. The Spurs will have his $4 million salary on their books for this coming season, and then right after he got waived by the Spurs, right once he cleared waivers, the Phoenix Suns actually signed him to a 2-way contract. So just give me your initial thoughts of Hutchison being waived, and if this is kind of what you expected.
Yeah, so I don't think this is unexpected for sure. I think what's interesting is kind of like you said, we're in the doldrums of the offseason. Free agency was over a month ago at this point, and training camp starts up later this month. Mm-hmm. But it's just a very interesting time where the Spurs have been kind of active in terms of transactions in this very interesting, like randomly early in September, which is just something you wouldn't expect. It seems like the fact that they waited this long to waive him, that maybe they were kind of trying to make a decision on it. Maybe they were negotiating with Bates-Diop about what kind of contract he'd be willing to take. And I know we're going to talk about that next. It's just very interesting. It almost seems like they were kind of waiting for some dominoes to fall, and this isn't the last one either. They still need to waive a player, if I'm not mistaken. So it's definitely a situation where, there's more dominoes to fall, but it definitely seemed like they were waiting for one to fall before the other did. So
that's interesting. So I hadn't honestly thought about that, about how you're right though. I mean, the transactions came really quickly, right, one after the other, like you're saying, like dominoes falling here. So yeah, that was interesting. The fact that they waived Hutchison, who they probably couldn't find a trade for, considering he's been coming off injury riddled seasons, and also he really hasn't been going up to expectations from where he was drafted a few years ago. And then also, right after that, they end up signing Bates-Diop. So let's go ahead and jump right into that second topic, and that is the Spurs re-signing Keita Bates-Diop. This one, in a way, is kind of surprising. I was maybe expecting him to return on a 2-way contract, but instead, earlier this week, Woj breaks breaks the news that Bates-Diop re-signed for 2 years. And so we have gotten some deals. Some notes now that Bates-Diop has officially signed his deal. According to Keith Smith of Spotrac, Bates-Diop did sign a 2-year deal for the veteran minimum for each year. Next season is a non-guaranteed deal as long as the Spurs don't have him on the roster past October 17th, 2022. And this, offers continued, cap flexibility in the event that the Spurs do want to open up some cap space next offseason. They now have Bates-Diop, they have Trey Jones, they have Drew Eubanks, and I think Zach Collins, all on non-guaranteed deals, so they could, become a cap space team if they want to next offseason. What this does to the team in terms of roster numbers, the Spurs now have 17 players on guaranteed contracts, and that means, like you mentioned right now, Collin, that the team needs to either waive or trade two players to get the roster down to 15 players and 2-way players by October 18th, which necessarily isn't training camp or the preseason, but it's right before the regular season begins. So right now, their total roster count is up to 18 players with Bates-Diop back, and the Spurs can still invite up to 2 players for training camp when that kicks off on September 28th. So here's my question, what were your thoughts on this signing, the fact that they didn't just give him a 2-way contract, they actually gave him a full 2-year NBA deal? What are your thoughts there?
So that is pretty interesting. I think I was surprised to see that he got a guaranteed contract, and especially one for the full roster, not a 2A, like you said. I think what's kind of interesting about that is I know that another topic we're going to talk about later is Aminu, and I almost wonder if that has any bearing on that, because maybe they're just kind of shoring up that end of the bench rotation. And so I'm trying to think, because they need to waive a couple of players and that end of bench rotation is kind of not set in stone yet because of that, maybe they just realized, okay, a 1-year veteran minimum guaranteed, the next year is non-guaranteed. Really, you can't get better at that in terms of a price, and they can kind of solidly lock in someone in one of those like third string lineup type of things. I don't know if they have a whole lot of expectations for him playing a lot this season, but it's always good to have a lot of like bodies willing to play throughout the season, because there are going to be games where 5 players are missing randomly or something like that, or rest or something. So at the price point, I think it makes sense to kind of solidify that end of the rotation, or kind of end of the bench kind of group there.
Yeah, and I agree with you too. Kind of where his role is going to be. It's going to be more so, I would say, like in that third string kind of lineup where, he's not necessarily a starter. He's not going to be a player on the second unit on a night-to-night basis. But like you said, if somebody goes down with injury or there's a few players out, he can be there as a player, can step in. Also, he's known for his defense at this point in his career. So maybe Coach Pop wants to put him as a defender against a certain matchup, or if in case somebody gets in foul trouble. So again, I do see him more so like on that third string, kind of like what you were saying there. Now, I did have an interesting question, because I read Jeff McDonald of the Express News' article on Bates-Diop re-signing, and he actually talked to Bates-Diop and got a few quotes from Bates-Diop. But Jeff, in his writing, made it almost seem like as if, even though it's a guaranteed contract in year one, it almost seems like he's still trying to make the team. I feel like because they give him a fully guaranteed salary, that his spot is pretty safe. But what are your thoughts? The fact that Jeff mentioned in that article that that he's still trying to make it make it through the preseason to get a roster spot. What are your thoughts there? Do you think he's more safe, or he might be one of the players who ends up getting waived, even though he is getting paid a full guaranteed salary?
That is interesting, because I'm trying to think of what the point would be for the Spurs side, and maybe they're kind of looking at it like they brought this guy in. He was in the system for a year. They like who he is as a person, and they're hoping to keep him around. But if it doesn't work out, they can kind of give him kind of a payday for this year. I kind of as a favor type of thing. And I mean, obviously that's good for him if he is competing for a roster spot to get guaranteed money for this season. But it is a little bit confusing to me what the Spurs' objective would be if he wasn't kind of secure in his role, other than maybe just kind of doing him a favor, saying, we liked you in the system, we want to bring you back, but if it doesn't work out, we're not real. I mean, the Spurs really aren't going to be using that money for anything else at this point. This is kind of going to be an interesting season, and that's going to be shown with, I think, some of the other roster cuts here. But I think that doesn't make a ton of sense to me as the Spurs, other than kind of just like giving him some guaranteed money if he does get cut, because they kind of liked who he was in their system.
Okay, yeah, so same here. Again, because it's for the veteran minimum, you could maybe see them waiving him if they need to trim the roster down. But again, I really feel like he's one of the players who just because of the kind of deal that you just gave him, guaranteed money here, I do feel like it's more of a safer option for him to stay on the team. That's the most likely option. But again, we'll see what happens in training camp. So that's again interesting that Jeff McDonald noted that in his article over on the Express News. All right, so Keita Bates-Diop is back. So that means, like we mentioned, that the roster now has 17 players, and the Spurs do need to either waive or trade 2 players before October 18th, or by October 18th is that deadline. And so that does mean, like you said, Collin, dominoes will have to fall, where there's going to have to still be some more roster moves from now until like I said, October 18th. And so obviously, week after week, we continue to discuss here on the Spurscast and over on our site Project Spurs about Thaddeus Young and Al-Farouq Aminu. Again, the reason why we continue to bring these two players up is because of their situation. They're very much like where Chandler Hutchison was. They're on the final year of their deals. They're veteran players. They're going to be like I said, free agents next off season. They also have no experience with the team, so they're going to be. I know that these two players are more veteran players who could really help you. But again, long-term goals, I don't think the Spurs are going to want to have these two players, and in the case of Young, he could probably get the Spurs either like a first-round pick or maybe several seconds. So that's why he has a lot more trade value. And then Aminu, it's interesting to watch because we don't know what his trade value is, because he really hasn't been an impactful player in the last few seasons. So let's first begin with Thaddeus Young and his situation, Collin. He is going to get he has a $14.1 million contract coming up for this season, where he's in the final year of his deal, like I mentioned. He has been linked to the Suns and Cavs as having interest in him. The problem, though, as I've discussed last week on the Spurscast, is that if the Spurs were to trade with the Suns or the Cavs, they have to take back contracts in order to move Young to those teams, and that becomes a problem because then they're kind of right where they're at right now, where they're going to be in that same situation where they're stuck saying, who do we waive? Do we waive these players, or do we trade them to another team? So it's kind of like ending up in the same place. Now, there are some teams that are interesting. These are what I'm calling the trade exception teams. These specific teams that I'm about to name have large enough trade exceptions to absorb Young's salary, where the Spurs can maybe take back picks for him, but not have to take back actual players with contracts. So these are the Boston Celtics, who, if they did this, they would put them in the luxury tax. The New Orleans Pelicans, who are interesting because even if they absorbed Young's contract, they would still be safe in terms of being $7.2 million away from the tax. The Orlando Magic, who would also be pretty safe, being $8.7 million away from the tax. And then also there's the Oklahoma City Thunder, who don't have a trade exception, but they do have a lot of cap space that they can open up. They can open up to $32.6 million. Actually, yeah, if they did actually get rid of those trade exceptions, they could open up $32.6 million to take in Young. Now, again, I think the Celtics are we might be able to write them off just because, again, they would have to determine if they want to go to the tax to get Young. The Magic, they're a young developing team like the Spurs, so maybe they don't want a veteran on their team. And then same thing for the Thunder. If the Spurs were going to have to trade Young to the Thunder, I think that the Thunder would be the team that wants to say, okay, well, no, you need to give us assets to take Young's contract. So I don't think that would happen. So that makes the Pelicans interesting, Colin. What are your thoughts about if, again, we're not reporting this, we're just having an open discussion. What if New Orleans tried to go after Young by taking him into their trade exception, considering this is a team that needs to be competitive and try to get into the playoffs, to try to keep Zion Williamson happy and just kind of keeping that organization afloat? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that would certainly be interesting. I don't, off the top of my head, remember kind of what draft capital they have going forward. I know that they got a lot from the. Actually, no, they should still have quite a bit because they got a lot in the Anthony Davis trade, and then they had. I think they gave up a pick in this offseason to get Devion Graham, but I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, they would have a good amount of picks, I think, and obviously they would need to send something out for the Spurs because. To me, I was looking at the roster and man, the players look. It's really tight in terms of how are the Spurs going to get down to 15.
Yes.
But in my personal opinion, in a perfect world, this might not be able to happen. I think that the best case scenario would be for the Spurs to take it into the season with Thad Young, just because he is a good player, and I think that you would rather try to create a bidding war with contenders who could use a player like him around the trade deadline than trade him now just to shed a roster spot. I guess they could trade him to a team who would have to send back money and cap, but then send Diop with them. I don't like. There's just. I would just rather the Spurs take it into the season if I were trying to think of the best way for this deal to go. But I think if they were going to make it in the offseason, the Pelicans are a really interesting partner that I hadn't thought of. That one makes the most sense in terms of just kind of clearing a roster spot.
The first Sunday of the NFL season is here, and the excitement continues with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. DraftKings is giving all new customers a can't-miss offer to celebrate the return of the NFL season. Bet just $1 on any football game this weekend and receive $200 in free bets instantly, no matter what. That's right. DraftKings Sportsbook is giving all new customers $200 in free bets instantly when they bet at least $1 on any football game. DraftKings is safe, reliable, and secure, making it easy for you to deposit and withdraw your money at your convenience. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use promo code TBPN to receive $200 in free bets when you place a $1 bet on any Week 1 game. That's promo code TBPN to get your free $200 in free bets instantly this week at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Must be 21 or older, New Jersey, Indiana, or Pennsylvania only. New customers only. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or in Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. Yeah, so I hadn't looked at their what they have in terms of draft assets. In terms of first round picks, you're right. They have a lot of swaps going on from now until about like 2027. Different swaps. They do on their pick though. In the first, it's just that there's a bunch of swaps going on, and then in the second round picks as well. They're all over the place. They don't start getting their own until about 2026, I believe. So that's interesting to watch. Now here's a good question because you just made me think of something here. Let's just go with that scenario that you just mentioned. Let's just say the Spurs do keep Thaddeus Young and they take him into the season, so that maybe they're going to trade him in February or March, whenever the trade deadline is. Now, with that happening, let's assume they either trade Aminu or waive him. So then here's and just again in this hypothetical, who's the other player that gets waived then in this situation where they keep Young?
I think that's the instance where Bates-Diop is saying like, okay, he got his guaranteed money, but he's not on the roster, because that's the, I mean, to me, like if I'm removing myself emotionally from the situation, just in terms of like what the Spurs culture would think, it's hard for them to part with someone like Drew Eubanks, who they really kind of in this way, like they're fine with parting with someone like Drew Eubanks because he got a pay raise or another team really loved him, but like just for someone they brought up in their own system, someone who's kind of done everything that they've wanted him to do and has just grown in San Antonio, I think that the Spurs kind of make emotional ties with players like that, and it would be weird for them just to cut him. But if I were to like remove myself from the Spurs ethos, I think that Drew Eubanks would be a good option. I just don't think the Spurs are an organization that would do that without maybe trying to move him to a team where he had more opportunities. Like, yeah, that's really difficult because Thad Young and Aminu are the two easiest ones to figure out. Like, okay, they're gone and their roster is perfect and it makes sense.
Yeah.
But I like trying to get some sort of like young, intriguing player plus a late first round pick at the trade deadline for Thad Young is just, I feel like, the best case scenario here. And that's what I feel like would be better for the Spurs if they could take it into the season. And I almost don't want them to like make a trade now and to lose that ability later. So like, it really is hard because I don't know who the Spurs would be willing to give up, but like when I'm trying to think of transactional based and like what's the best front office move taking out any of the human element, it's really taking Thad Young into the season and trying to create a bidding war over him. But the human element is a part of it, and I just can't see the Spurs waiving Drew Eubanks and not helping him out in some way.
Yeah, if that was the case, where like you said, they were going to keep Young until the actual trade deadline later on in the season to try to get the best possible trade package for him, then I also agree with you. I don't know if they would release Drew Eubanks, though he's in a tough position because again he has Jock Landale there now. When Zach Collins gets healthy, he's there, and then you still got Jakob Poeltl there at the 5 where he normally plays, or even at the 4. There's a bunch of players at that position as well. So again, it would for me. I just think, again, I'm just giving my thoughts here, that I think it would either be Eubanks or Bates-Diop who they would have to make a determination on in the event that they were going to keep Young going into trying to get the best trade package for him closer to the trade deadline. So again, that's kind of an interesting question. It's a scenario to watch is if they do keep Young to start the season. One of these players who's more attached to the team, like Drew Eubanks, or a guy who just got a new contract and Keita Bates-Diop might end up getting waived in that kind of scenario. And so now let's talk about the other player who really hasn't got a lot of mention, although it almost feels like he may not be on the team going into the regular season, whether he gets waived or traded, and that's Al-Farouq Aminu, because again he's very much like Young and kind of like where Chandler Hutchison were in their situation. So Aminu makes just a little bit less than Young. He's getting a $10.1 million this coming season, and he's also in the final year of his deal, so he can become a free agent next offseason. There are several, so because his salary is a little bit less, there's actually more opportunity for the Spurs to trade him to a team into a trade exception without taking back salary of other players. And so we still have the same teams. You have the Pelicans, the Celtics, the Magic, but now going by Basketball Insider's latest updates, that the Brooklyn Nets actually have a trade exception large enough to absorb Al-Farouq Aminu, and so do the Dallas Mavericks, two teams that are obviously playoff level teams that maybe could add a veteran type of player. And then, of course, there's the Oklahoma City Thunder, where they can open up cap space to absorb Aminu's contract if they needed to. But my question is to you, Collin. What do you think about these type of teams with the trade exceptions, and where do you think these teams even see Aminu? Whereas Young has a lot more trade value right now because we know he's an impactful player. Teams haven't seen that level of play or that production from Aminu in a few years. What are your thoughts on some of these teams with their trade exceptions?
Yeah, I think that a trade for Aminu is going to be difficult just because, we have seen him kind of be a productive player and kind of one of those big wingy, like good defender players. And that was valuable when that was what he was. We just haven't seen that in a couple of years. And so I think it's going to be difficult for a team to take that in for $10 million, especially like if he's being traded into a trade exception or into cap space. So because those teams would be giving up their trade exceptions to be getting Aminu. And so I feel like the Spurs would have to send something along with it. Same with the Thunder. The Spurs are getting helped out in that situation. The Thunder are giving up their cap space. So that one is just tough for me because I don't see kind of the benefit for those teams in doing it unless the Spurs were willing to attach some draft capital, which I'm not maybe too keen on them doing just to get rid of Aminu.
Yeah, I agree with you there. If the Spurs are having to send out assets to get rid of Aminu's contract, I don't think they're doing that. They're probably just waive him themselves. And so just based on your answer there, I think you're basically saying that like teams, whereas young teams are going to want him,
yep.
Aminu, it's more so like the Spurs are going to have to get help for somebody to take his contract kind of thing. So yeah, I agree with you there. So then of course that opens up the question: if the Spurs can't find a trade partner for Aminu, well then do they look at maybe either waiving him completely or looking at a buyout? So what would a buyout look like for Aminu? Let's just say that the Spurs and Aminu agree to a buyout. It might look like Aminu gives back $2.6 million of his contract, and so basically the cap hit for the Spurs would be $7.5 million. And basically this would probably happen only if Aminu knew he had another deal lined up with another team for the veteran minimum, so that basically he can make back that $2.6 million with his new team that he's going to sign with. So what are your thoughts on the chances of maybe a buyout if the Spurs can't find a trade partner for Aminu?
Yeah, so that is pretty interesting. I am wondering if they that'd be, I think like you said, maybe if they had a minimum deal lined up, but I almost feel like they can just waive him kind of without any sort of giving back, just because this is the last year of his deal. Mm-hmm. My understanding, and this is kind of something very esoteric and arcane that I don't remember if I know for sure well enough, but my understanding is that even if a player is waived and not stretched on the books, he is paid out. It is waived what the team pays out to the player anyway. So like if he is waived with the $10.1 million, even if he's not stretched, the Spurs would still be paying him the $3 million over 3 years. It just doesn't hit the books that way. And so giving back the $2.6 million, I mean, obviously we're still talking about millions of dollars, but when you're paying out that different, that's less than $1 million a year, So I don't know if that makes a huge difference to them, because they're already over the cap as it is, and they're nowhere near the tax. So I almost feel like they can just waive him without a big deal. I mean, if Aminu is willing to give some back in a buyout, I guess that's willing. Like they should be willing to have that discussion just to see what they can get. But if not, then I think they could waive him without worrying about it too much.
So let's just do a little game here. Again, we're not reporting this; we're just having a conversation. What are the percent? Just give me a percentage of what you think that Aminu is actually still on this team by the time regular season opens up on October 20th.
Okay, so the only way I could see Aminu on the team is if the Spurs are in the Ben Simmons trade and it's a 3-for-1 trade or something like that, a 4-for-2 or something, where now the roster crunch is Philly's job to figure out, right? Like the Spurs figure out their roster crunch through a Ben Simmons trade. If that happens, then I think that there is maybe a small chance that Aminu is still on the roster, even though he could be good for salary matching purposes in that trade. But let's say he's not, and the Spurs just won another body because now they're at exactly 15. But I think so. That's basically the probability of the Simmons trade happening, and then the probability of him not being included. So I would say like 5%, because if that Simmons trade doesn't happen, I don't think there's any way he's on the roster, unless there's another trade where they're sending out more players than they're taking in. But I think other than that, there's no way he's on the roster.
Okay, I'm with you. I'm liking that 5 to 10% chance that he's still on the team going into the opening of the season. Again, because if they don't either trade him or waive him, then it's tough, because then they would have to get rid of, and let's just say they keep Young as well. Well, then they would have to get rid of two of their younger players that they like, in terms of like Drew Eubanks and Keita Bates-Diop. So again, I'm with you. I think that's kind of even though there's been no reporting on it, that the Spurs looking to buy him out or waive him, or even there's no trade rumors with him yet. Again, I think we both feel that that's kind of he's probably the odd man out right now, and then whoever that other player is, whether it's Young or somebody else, that's just kind of what's going to happen. What we're kind of thinking here, and that's going to be the interesting thing to watch these next few weeks. Is the Spurs could have Aminu and Young on the training camp roster. They could have them both on the preseason game roster. But sometime before October 18th, they need to make a decision of who are they going to either trade or waive. It has to be at least 2 players removed from this team, so that they could take that roster down to 15 players and 2 two-way players by opening night of the regular season. So again, that'll be kind of something fun to watch there in these next few weeks, and see what happens and which decision the front office makes with all these different players. All right, so thanks again to Collin for joining me here in the Spurscast episode. Also, to Spurscast listeners, don't forget to visit projectspurs.com. We have a lot going on the site. Our latest piece is by Jonas Clark. It's called Austin Spurs: Could the Past Predict the Future? coach with Nielsen gone. So this is about the new assistant coach Nielsen, moving up from Austin up to the San Antonio organization. He's going to be on Coach Pop's bench. Benjamin Bornstein also has a new piece called Names to Know in the 2022 NBA Draft. We're winging it, so Ben looks at a bunch of different prospects over at the wing position. Michael DeLeon wrote up the report when the Spurs signed Keita Bates-Diop to his new 2-year deal. I also wrote up the article on the Spurs waiving Chandler Hutchison and what that means for the team. And then something else I've kind of added to the not necessarily Project Spurs, but if you go to our YouTube channel, it's called Project Spurs Network TV. If you just subscribe there, I've been making these very short videos, about I'd say like 3 to 5 minutes, where it's just kind of giving my thoughts on on whatever move the Spurs made, and instead of having to wait until we record a Spurscast, where we're obviously going to way more detail on the Spurscast, but again, it's just quick thoughts on different moves. So I have one on Hutchinson being waived, and then also on Bates-Diop's re-signing with the team. So thanks again to Collin for joining me here on the Spurscast, and to Michael DeLeon for mixing this episode. From all of us at Project Spurs, stay safe and have a great day.